If you like Star Trek and Star Wars and you like ship battles, you'll like this channel. And if you like what you see, please subscribe and make a comment. It helps. It really does. And with that being said, let's get started. Welcome everybody. I just want to bring to everyone's attention my hypothesis about the Romulan star empire of TNG. So I have a hypothesis that I want to share with the audience, and then I want your guys' opinion of what you think. I'm going to share some information with you on why I think it's a possibility that the Romulan star empire may have been the most powerful empire in TNG. Yes, the Romulan star empire. So for this analysis, I do want to say it's only going to be reviewing the Alpha Quadrant powers. So we're going to be talking about the Federation, the Klingons, the Cardassians, and the Romulans. We are not going to take in consideration, obviously, the Borg or the Dominion. Alright, so I'm going to be pulling my analysis data from a couple of sources. Obviously, it's going to be from TNG, Deep Space Nine, the original Star Trek series, and Enterprise, as well as a magazine source called VASA, which is a game that some of you may or may not know about. And then I'm going to be pulling some of the history of the pre-Federation Romulan War from a website or a YouTube channel called Venom Geek Media 98 Battlespace. So he has a good collection of videos that are talking about the pre-war with the Federation and the Romulans before the Federation was the Federation. So it would be the Earth Alliance war with the Romulan Star Empire. There's a lot of good information there that will tell you and give you some perspective of some of the ideologies I have with the race based on some of the information that was given in these story format videos. So to truly understand my analysis, there's some things that we have to speak about, and it's going to be the Earth Alliance War with the Romulan Star Empire of 2155. So one of the things that I want to take in consideration is the technological difference gap in technology during this time period. So this would be during the time period of Captain Archer. And so when we think about this, we know that there was conflicts with the Romulan Star Empire before the Federation was formed. And so these are some of the things that I want you to think about. Now, from the Romulans' perspective, the Earth Alliance was a new up and rising power that they were afraid was going to succeed them and take their place as number two. Because in my opinion, the Klingon Empire was still the stronger of the two, but the Romulan Star Empire was right behind them. And they didn't like the fact that there was more competition, not to mention the Vulcans, the Andorians, and many other races who had decent-sized armies were then affiliating themselves with this new up-and-coming power. And so the Romulans were aware or felt that they were in danger and that these empires were going to merge into one and overthrow their superiority. So in order to prevent this, the Romulans knew that their ships were superior than that of the Earth Alliance forces, and they felt that they were going to be able to take the Earth Alliance forces out quickly, efficiently, and easily. But that is not what had happened. The Earth Alliance was able to produce ships at an enormous rate that the Romulans were not able to keep up with. So even though the Romulans had the superior ships and superior technology, they didn't have the numbers or logistics in order to support this long, drawn-out war. So the Federation was going for the long haul. And the Romulans could not keep this battlefront going for as long as they did. They were starting to lose too many ships, and it was becoming too costly, and their shipbuilding capacities were nowhere equal to that of the Earth Alliance forces and its allies. So what ended up happening is the Romulans began losing too many ships, and the war had to end. The logistics of this war continuing was too much for the Romulan Star Empire to continue, and they were worried about bankrupting the Empire continuing this war. Another thing that I want to note and that people should take into consideration is when you learn about the tactics and the way that the Romulans behaved during this time period, this idea or ideology that the Romulans are these cowards that just want to hit you in the back and that's it, you completely realize that that's unrealistic. The Romulans are brutal, efficient killing machines. They attacked colonies, they attacked transports, they didn't even care who or what they were attacking. Anyone and everything was a target. They nuked entire planets and colonies. They didn't care. The Romulans are absolutely vicious and brutal, and remember that. So you need to remember this from the Romulan perspective. They lost to a minor power. And not only did they lose to that minor power, it cost them many great Romulan officers and Romulan starships, and the youth of the Romulan Empire cost them dearly for this battle, that they did not win. They were forced to turn around and retreat, and then that emboldened the Federation and its allies to form an alliance that they could not fend off anymore. So what happened? This started a Cold War between the Romulans, the Federation, and its allies. And this went on for a long time. So let's fast forward to Kirk's era. We know when Kirk dealt with the Romulans that they were an aggressive, dangerous species. They weren't cowards hiding in the background. They were a fully functioning military, an aggressive army, and they had decent-sized ships, and their ships were moderately powerful. Now, I will admit that the Federation was a technological marvel, and their ships were far superior than the ships that the Romulan Star Empire had at this time. But the Romulans came up with pretty advanced countermeasures, such as the Romulan bird of prey, which was using an incredibly advanced torpedo system referred to as... So one of the countermeasures was this plasma torpedo. Though it was short range, it was incredibly powerful, and it was effective against its enemies, and it made the Romulan warbird a dangerous ship to deal with. So these Romulan warbirds of this era were referred to as birds of prey. So this Romulan bird of prey was incredibly dangerous and was something to be feared. So one of the most important events from my analysis about why the Romulan Empire became stronger than the Federation in the future in TNG is this. The Klingons and the Romulans had an alliance because the Klingons went after the Federation and lost, just like the Romulans did. Because both those empires lost to this new up-and-coming power, they had an alliance with one another where they were sharing technology, where the Klingons were sharing their advanced battleship, the D7, which was superior than any ship that the Romulans had, and the Romulans were sharing the advanced cloaking device to the Klingon Empire. Now, they had an alliance stating that if either one of the empires was attacked by the Federation, that they would be supported by the other military. So if the Romulans were attacked, the Klingons would defend them. So this is really important for people to remember this. The Romulans and the Klingons had an alliance, a military alliance, to take on the Federation. Now we all know what happened is that the main dilithium source for the Klingon Empire, the moon of Praxis, exploded, and that the Klingon Empire was forced, my key point was forced, to sign a non-aggression treaty with the Federation because of a complete and utter economic collapse. So this economic collapse led the Klingons to forming a non-aggression pact with the Federation. Now, this was split down the middle with the Empire. Some Klingons were okay with this. Others hated the idea that they were going to join forces with the Federation, because this is a rivalry that had been going on for a long time, and there was a lot of hatred between the Klingons and the Federation. So now you guys have this understanding. So there was this mutual agreement between the two major empires, between the Romulans and the Klingons, that they would defend one another against the Federation. But the Klingons had signed a non-aggression treaty with the Federation, and this worried the Romulans. So the Romulans actually planned an attack against the Federation by going through Klingon space to catch them off guard, because the Federation was very aware that the Romulans couldn't be trusted and had large fleets on the borders of Romulan space. So they thought they would bypass these big fleets, go down, attack the Federation with a surprise attack, give them a killing blow, and that the Klingons would help them. But that is not what happened. So the Romulan fleet tried to fly through Klingon space in order to surprise attack the Federation. The Klingon fleet that engaged the Romulans turned the Romulan fleet around and said, "No, we will not engage the Federation through our space. Go back." The treaty that the Klingons had with the Romulans at that moment was completely and utterly broken, and the Romulans would never forget. So this absolutely enraged the Romulan Empire, because think about it from the Romulan perspective. Their ally that they gave their technology to was supposed to help them fight their enemy. Instead, they sided with their enemy. So at this point, the power scale had completely changed. The Federation had gotten enormous, and the Romulan Star Empire had been building ships that were modern and powerful, just like the Excelsior. The Klingons didn't have ships like this, and the Romulans knew they didn't have ships like this, and they took advantage of the Klingon situation. Their economics were bad, so they couldn't retaliate, so they began attacking Klingon systems and harassing them and raiding them. But the Klingons could only defend their systems. They didn't have the ships, the crew, or the money or resources because of their situation with Praxis to do anything about the Romulans. And so the Romulans took full advantage of this. And this even heightened the hatred between the Klingons and the Romulans. So, through the perspective of the Romulans, they believed that the Klingons and the Federation were going to do a joint attack, and so they decided to bottleneck their forces, and they began retreating into their own territory, and they still attacked the Klingons from time to time, but they never had any full-on engagements. It was just attacking outside colonies, attacking rogue ships, and things of that nature. So they never stopped attacking the Klingons because they were angry and pissed at the Klingons. But they did the same thing with the Federation from time to time. But eventually they got to the point where they completely exiled themselves from the Federation, and they just started to watch. So I know that the first time we see the Romulans again in TNG, the Federation talks about how they hadn't seen the Romulans, and the last time they saw the Romulans, it cost them a lot of lives, and all this is true. But here's something else to think about. Why the Romulans were away from galactic affairs, doing their own thing, isolating themselves, they were still out there in the galaxy gaining information. The Tal Shiar was putting spies everywhere, the Klingons, the Federation. I mean, there wasn't anywhere that there wasn't a Tal Shiar operative or spy. So they have created a complete and utter spy network, stealing technology. And one of the things that I think, and one of the main reasons why I would say that they were superior than the Federation at this time, is because when the Klingons and the Federation signed that non-aggression pact, so take in consideration what the Khmer Accords. So that's the major event that took place where the Romulans are still building ships for 20 years. But the Klingons aren't because they can't. And the Federation isn't building new warships because they're honoring this agreement with the Klingons for the ceasefire. But the Romulans aren't doing this. The Romulans don't care. And so that's one of the major reasons why when people talk about the Romulan Star Empire having this small fleet, it doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever. Because they were building ships at this point. They had no major wars, no major galactic interactions. There was an interaction later on. The last time you see the Romulans is when they destroy a Nebula-class starship. And then they go into full exile, and they attack the Klingon outpost. And then that's the last we hear of the Romulans. And so what ends up happening is the Romulans basically go into their own territories. They're staying there, doing their own thing. They're thinking that this war is going to happen. It doesn't happen. So they start sending their cloak ships out there. They start creating a complete and utter network with the Tal Shiar and other criminal organizations in Starfleet, in the Klingon Empire, everywhere. So they know exactly what is going on with the Federation, so much so that when they see the Romulans again, the Romulans tell them that they know their weapons and their technology on their most advanced ship at the time, which is the Galaxy-class starship. So the Romulans are already aware of what the Galaxy-class starship is capable of doing, and they openly tell the Federation, Captain Picard, in their encounter, that they know that they're not capable of delivering this much firepower because they already know what the ship's capable of doing. And the Romulans had built ships that were capable of destroying Federation starships with no problem, like the Warbird. So the Warbird was built to take on the Galaxy-class starships of the Federation. And we know during TNG that the Enterprise was no match for a Romulan Warbird. We know Captain Picard stated this, and Captain Picard said this. He would know better than anyone else the capabilities of a Galaxy-class starship or even the Federation. So when he was aware that the Romulan warbird was stronger than the Enterprise, I would say he was correct. And then not only that, that also was supported by 3 different captains of Romulan warbirds. He said that they were capable of destroying a Galaxy-class starship. So most people that want to argue against the idea of the Romulan Star Empire having a lot of ships, they want to point out is that the Romulan system was low in dilithium, which is true. But here's the counterpoint to that. By the time that the Enterprise C was being built, they were already building ships with quantum singularities. Because of the quantum singularity, you no longer are dependent on the resources that the other major powers are. Dilithium crystals isn't a problem with the designs of the Romulan ships. And because the singularities give them energy that doesn't need to be replenished, and these ships are so large and they have so many parts that can keep the ship going, they can go into deep space, spy on you, and they don't have to come back for years. And so they have ships all over the galaxy that are getting data, acquiring information, stealing information, sabotaging, you don't even know it, and they've been doing it for decades, and no one had any idea that they were there. The Romulans not only do they have a massive spy network, they are not dependent on dilithium, and they were building ships for 20 years while no one else was. And then on top of that, they had the most powerful warship of the time period, because this ship was capable of taking on anything that the Federation had in a one-on-one. And they had a huge army of warbirds. Now, why they never attacked the Federation is because the Romulans didn't feel like they needed to. They felt like that they could destroy the Federation if they deemed it necessary. But by this point, they realized that the Federation was not going to invade them, the Federation wasn't going to attack them, and that the Federation had become completely under pacifist. And the Klingon Empire, they had already corrupted, they caused the Civil War, and there was really nothing to worry about it. There was nothing the Klingon Empire could do to the Romulan Star Empire. And the Federation were just a bunch of flying hippies. So they knew the Federation were pacifists, and they were taking advantage of it. The best evidence for that is when they were planning on an invasion of Vulcan. Remember this? And they were going to send a bunch of troops. They were going to surprise, take over Vulcan. And then they blew up their own ships because that failed and they were going to be able to succeed because the Federation found out what they were doing. But my point is the Romulans were confident enough to be willing to try to take over one of the major races' home planet of the United Federation. That would have guaranteed that they would create a war. And the Romulans were willing to do this. So I want you to go back in time and think about the first time that the Captain Picard ran into the Romulans and all the different things and dialect that was going on between these two and what we learned from it. So one of the main things that we learned from the Romulans is that the Romulans were aware of Federation technology, and they were aware of Federation weapon technology when they stated that they knew that their colonies couldn't have been destroyed because they were aware of the firepower that was necessary to do that, and that a Federation starship didn't have the capabilities to take out that colony or station. And another thing to take consideration was how Worf thought about the Romulans, how he thought they were traitors. But in reality, that wasn't true. The Romulans weren't traitors. The Klingons were the traitors when they were supposed to be backing the Romulan Star Empire to take on the Federation. Like cowards, they didn't do it. Instead, they turned on their own ally. So from the perspective of most Klingons, they're not aware of what the Great House was doing. And this is most evident by what we had learned about the Klingon Council and their form of disgrace and how they made Worf's family take dishonor in order to protect another great house. So we know that the Romulans and the Klingon perspective of one another is very mixed up, but the Romulans are actually correct with knowing that the Klingons are the traitors. And most Klingons have no idea that this actually happened because this has been hidden from them because they don't want to be dishonored. So my next bit of evidence of why I believe the Romulans were more powerful than the Federation is the way that the changelings, that the Dominion viewed the Romulans as the number one threat. So we know that the Romulans tried to eradicate the Founders. So we know that the Founders were aware that the Romulans and the Cardassians were willing to go after them and were planning on annihilating them. And this was in a plan that the Romulans were doing, and they were bringing the Cardassians. So we know that not only is part of the Klingon Empire basically aligned with the Romulans, but we know that the Cardassians were too. So not only do they have the superior espionage with the Obsidian Order and Tel Shiar working together, but on top of all that, they have the support of some of the Klingon houses and the Cardassians. So they have more allies, better intelligence, and a possibly larger army. And that may be hard to believe, but give me a moment, and I want you to think back to DS9. Remember the large fleet that was taken out by the Dominion, right? So the Romulans lost a lot of ships, and what the Changelings said is that now the Obsidian Order and the Tel Shiar were dangerous organizations. They felt that those organizations by themselves were a threat to the Dominion. And so they took them out first. And then what happened? Then they convinced the Klingons to attack the Cardassians. The Cardassians then were no longer a threat. And the Romulans, they made a peace treaty with the Romulans slightly after that, right? Well, think about this. We know that their plan was to take out the Klingon Empire by using them to attack the Cardassians. Then they weakened the Cardassians and the Klingon Empire, and they took advantage of the Cardassians being weakened, had the Cardassians join them. Then they went after the Federation. So it goes Klingons, Cardassians, then the Federation, and then they would take down the Romulans last, if things went as planned. So my argument would be is the Founders felt that the Romulans were more dangerous than anyone else. The Founders, who have infiltrated the Klingons, the Cardassians, the Romulans, and the Federation, are telling you that the Romulans are the number one threat. If the Founders are telling you the Romulans and Tel Shiar are the number one threat to them, then that would tell me that they are probably the superpower of the Alpha Quadrant. And my other argument would be is the entire time the Federation and the Klingon are fighting the Dominion and the Cardassians, they are losing every battle. They're being pushed back, and they are never able to do any kind of real offensive until the Romulans joined the war. And it's stated over and over again that when the Romulans joined the war, they were able to go on the offensive. Now, we know that the Federation lost thousands and thousands of starships. Okay, so they were down thousands and thousands of starships. We know the Dominion had a massive army, but the Romulans came into the picture, and they were able to fill those gaps, and they were able to actually push the Cardassians and the Dominion back. Imagine how many starships you would have in order to compensate for the losses of the Klingons and the losses of the Federation. The Romulans were absolutely massive. They had to have had a massive army, an absolutely massive army, in order to be able to push the Alliance to the point where they were able to push the Dominion and the Cardassians back. If it wasn't for the Romulans joining the war, Sisko stated they would have lost. Okay, so let's backtrack and let's look at my theory and let's talk about it and let's see what we know. So one of the main reasons, and one of the biggest reasons, is they were building ships for 20 years when the other powers weren't. So you had the 20 years of advantage in technology and 20 years in building logistics. And then the second thing that I think that would be why it would probably be the superpower is because the ability not to be reliant on dilithium and using singularities means there's no limit to how many ships you can make. The next thing is, because you don't use dilithium, you have a superior spy network because of the singularity. You're able to go deeper in space and longer. So that means that they have deep space superiority. So that's another reason. So 20 years, singularities, superior spy network, and then deep space infiltration. Think about how invaluably valuable the ability to go deep into space, lay in wait as soon as your target leaves protecting whatever they're doing because of something else, you hit them. Then you're gone. Then you do it again somewhere else. So the Romulans can hit you in multiple places at once, and you can't do the same because they know where you're at and what you're doing, but you have no idea where they're at. So I do want to say something is after the war with the Dominion, the Romulans were definitely not the most powerful empire out there or even close. The Federation technology had skyrocketed during the Dominion War, and they rebuilt their ships at an enormous rate, and the Romulans never recovered from the war. So I'm saying that only before the Dominion War would they have been considered the superpower. Only then. Now, I want to give a special shout out to all the artists that we used, all their different media and stuff. I don't know who all these people are, but one of the ones that I do know is Battle Space, which is Venom Geek Media 98. And I really want to give a special thanks to them because that team or the individual who does it, a lot of those videos that I watched that was teaching us about the Romulan Star Empire of its past and stuff, it's the one that made me think about all this stuff. I would have never really known this or realized this until I seen the cultural index about the Romulans during that time period with the Earth Alliance War, and then seeing the different Romulan ships during the, what I'm going to say, the Kirk era, and then learning about the singularities and when they were built and all that stuff. All that information I didn't know about. I didn't know a whole lot about the FASA and these other ships and stuff. And when I learned that, I went, wait a minute. I'm like, oh my gosh, if this stuff, I never thought about all this. I didn't know about this. This means the Romulans were like the big ballers. And it explains a lot of the dialogue in TNG that I didn't understand or didn't really make sense to me. But then it totally makes sense now that I have all this additional information. So I want to thank you for putting that and all that hard work because you've inspired me to become a bigger Trekkie than I already was, and I didn't even know that was possible.